Okay, so over the past few decades, nature has been given us a very clear message when it comes to global warming or climate change. And we don't have to go into detail on this, but one big question is we should ask ourselves as chemical engineers is, are we listening? And on that question, I just want to say, yes, we are listening. Just have a look at CLB321 of 2021. Have a look at these students. They are working on saving the planet, one project at a time. So I just want to say to all of you CLB students, I am so proud of you. The way that you've worked on your projects, it is a privilege and an honor to work with students like you, and I am truly amazed by what you have done so far. So, yep, we are listening and we are working on saving the planet. So, this little talk, I just thought I will tell you a little story. It's called The Tale of Two Elements, and the two elements are nitrogen and phosphorus. And really, this is to give you maybe a better perspective of how we are the bioreaction engineering group, how we see our contribution to, making Earth a better place, and working towards environmental sustainability. So I've chosen nitrogen and phosphorus. Of course, there's more elements that human life requires to live, but let's now focus on these two crucial elements. And I want us to put ourselves into these atoms and really just travel with the atoms as they flow through what I call the anthropogenic journey. Okay, now anthropogenic, it's a word you can learn. That means, the influence of humans on nature. So if we have a look at what humans do to nitrogen and phosphorus, well, we start with the Haber-Bosch process, where about 2% of the world's energy expenditure goes into fixating atmospheric nitrogen into fertilizer. That's a hell of a lot of energy, people, a high temperature, high pressure process. The phosphorus gets mined, also using a lot of energy. And then, the fertilizer has to be transported. That's a lot of energy. It ends up on the soils where we grow our food stuff. So as soon as we have food stuff, this is an important fact. Did you guys know that 30 to 40% of all food that gets produced globally ends up as food waste? How amazing is that? Okay. And currently, the majority of this food waste ends up on landfills where it gets mixed with other garbage. Okay. So a lot of nitrogen, a lot of phosphorus in these landfills just lying there. And I'll tell you now what happens to it. Of course, as soon as we eat food, we generate human waste, and that then goes to the wastewater treatment facilities. Interesting is that when we treat wastewater, we denitrify. We spend a hell of a lot of energy to remove nitrogen back into the atmosphere. Okay. The final product is sludge, which will contain a lot of the phosphorus, and that's more or less, it doesn't contain all the paths that the nitrogen and the phosphorus take, but that gives you a broad picture of the anthropogenic nitrogen and phosphorus journey. Now the problem, and this is a big problem, comes in when we start looking at losses of nitrogen and phosphorus along the way. First of all, agriculture. Well, the typical farmer is interested in making money, and that means making my crops grow fast. Okay, if I do that, I typically apply a lot of fertilizer. Fertilizer is relatively cheap, and it is estimated that 50% of that fertilizer doesn't end up in the plants that we eat, but it leaches to the groundwater. So suddenly we're putting a lot of nutrients into nature. And the same happens with landfills. Most landfills aren't really well operated, and a lot of other garbage mixing in over time. There's a lot of leaching taking place, and you have exactly the similar thing. The nitrogen and the phosphorus that entered the system just goes out directly into the environment, into the groundwater. Similar for sludge. Of course, there is the option of using sludge in agricultural applications, but because of a lot of other stuff that gets mixed into the municipal wastewater, like toxins and heavy metals and stuff, it's not always easy to recycle the sludge back to agriculture. So these losses, People, it's really a bad thing. Okay. It's really one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss. Just have a look at this lake. You can see a beautiful algal plume here. Might look beautiful from above, but really what happened here was because of the massive amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus in the water, suddenly the ecological balance is completely disturbed. Nature works in beautiful and fine balances, but if we just dump a whole lot of nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus into the water, you typically get single species completely dominating and effectively killing a lot of other species in the long term, and that's really the cause of biodiversity loss. Now, have a look at this slide. The global economy. What's driving the global economy? And one big problem of the global economy is that the global economy is driving biodiversity loss at an alarming rate. It's not just about the elephants and the gorillas and what have you. It is a multitude of species, some as small as bacteria, that are getting destroyed on a daily basis. So really, we are killing off, genetic material at an alarming rate. And it took nature millions and billions of years to develop these genes, and we are basically destroying them at rates that are very alarming. Okay, it makes me sad, like almost nothing on earth, the rate of biodiversity loss that we are currently experiencing. Anyway, enough about that. Let's just talk a little bit about this anthropogenic journey. If we have a look at energy inputs, massive amounts of energy going into harbor baths, into mining the minerals, transporting the minerals in agricultural itself, in wastewater. So, the food production cycle and the treat of the waste actually takes an enormous amount of fossil fuels that needs to get burned to drive this process. So remember our objective. Let's talk about the objective. Let's just draw a black box around this process that we've just discussed, and we ask ourselves now, within this black box or within this boundary, what is the job? What can we do to make things better for the environment? And if we look at it in a chemical engineering sense, it's actually quite simple, because we put in a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus in, and then nitrogen and phosphorus get wasted to, and as I've shown you, to the water and to the groundwater, and initially, finally, affecting biodiversity even onto terrestrial landscapes. So really, the objective is to minimize the spillage of nitrogen and phosphorus. We should try and keep the nitrogen and phosphorus within the box. Also, the nitrogen that we lose for denitrification making gas, the idea is once you bring it in, you want to keep it inside. Okay. Of course, if there's zero spillage, there'll be zero coming in. Okay, and that's really what we're after. The other objective is, of course, the energy input. We want to minimize the amount of energy that we put into the system. So it's all about the circular economy, driving recycles while minimizing energy. That's the job, people. And when we talk about this job, the question is, how should we recycle? There are various and different ways of recycling. You'll see with us, we see a local recycling as more important than these big citywide recycle structures. And let's talk a little bit about that. So, for example, if we think of a citywide recycle, one would think, start using the sludge directly in agriculture and get some sort of method to use the landfill leachate to use that in agriculture. This is not impossible, but these facilities will be massive. We're talking big plants on the outskirts of the city, where a majority of the stuff needs to get collected, transported, and then processed. In our approach, we are going more with a local is lekker type of project, where we say, let's try and keep things close together, and the recycles themselves pretty small. So we are thinking of ways of utilizing the food waste directly to grow new food stuff. Okay, on that point, before we go on, I just want to give you an interesting piece of information. Did you know that in the next 2 decades, Africa will host the 10 fastest growing cities in the world? So if you talk about urban expansion, Africa is where it's going to be happening. Okay. And as soon as we start talking about urban, we realize that the amount of soil where we can grow agricultural stuff is not really available. And that's why we opt to work with soilless agriculture. Soilless implying we're in a city, we do it on a rooftop, we do it with hydroponics. Okay, so our project really will be in the cities, in these African cities that are expanding, and we are working on using the food waste. First of all, it's about the recycle of the nitrogen and the phosphorus, as we mentioned before, but there's energy spin-offs as well. So if you take it to anaerobic digestion, like you guys have, you generate the biogas, you can use this, different energy applications, your food, electricity, whatever. And then, the digestate or the off product, the product from the digestation is really something that can be used to grow plants because it contains all these nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. And in soilless agriculture, we can now basically make new food from old food. Okay. And this is the cycle that we try and work with. Of course, there'll be nitrogen and phosphorus coming into the system as food, and in our processes where we control the medium concentrations, it will all be about minimizing the leaching of nitrogen and phosphorus out of this recycle. Okay, so that's more or less what we're working on. You might ask, but why is this important to chemical engineering? What's the link to chemical engineering? Well, if you have a look, we're the bioreaction engineering group, and if you want to simplify what we do, one can say it's really all just about the concentration of the liquid that is in contact with the living organism, whether it's a bacteria, whether it's a plant, doesn't matter. But we as chemical engineers have the methods to measure the concentrations and control the concentrations using algorithms, using pumps. We can basically manipulate the environment or the concentration environment that these organisms are exposed to. And that gets very important in terms of understanding and operating this whole scheme that we've just spoke about. So I'm running out of time. I should have been 8 minutes. I see I'm not going to make it. I hope you don't have the same problem with your projects. Anyway, so just to give you an idea what we're currently working on. So anaerobic digestion will be central. These are process units linked with one another. We also use aerobic digestion at this stage. Of course, you can't immediately take your digestate and use it for hydroponics. So you need to have a biofilter where we do nitrification. We do a lot of work on nitrification. We do some work on hydroponics, growing the plants, controlling the concentrations of the medium that is exposed to the plants. And then, of course, the waste from the plant will still contain a lot of useful nutrients. Here, what we do is we have duckweed and azolla ponds where we actually grow biomass that, by the way, gets recycled back to the anaerobic digestion. So you get this whole idea of the circular economy. Every waste product is used again. Interesting, azolla is a beautiful plant because it can really grow without any nitrogen in the medium. So if you, for example, have a medium that is nitrogen lean, azolla has this amazing quality of fixating nitrogen from the air, and you can clean out your phosphates and other minerals. So people, it's a short video. It's just to give you an idea of what we're working on. Some of you have been asking about CSC projects and postgraduate stuff. This is really just to give you a broad overview of how we see our contribution in terms of impacting the future of sustainability in Africa. So, if you're interested, if you like this video and you want to learn more, please join us in Slack. We will have a bit of a discussion in terms of what's going to be happening next with this big project of ours. Thanks for listening, and cheerio.